Have you ever woken up with a tightness in your chest and a question you can't silence? What am I even doing with my life? Do you ever feel like you're walking through your days half awake, like your body's moving, but your soul hasn't shown up in weeks? You sit in traffic, you punch the clock, you answer emails, you pay bills, and still, deep down, there's this ache, this quiet desperation you don't talk about because you think no one else feels it. But what if that feeling isn't a sign of failure? What if it's a signal? What if the restlessness isn't something to escape, but something to explore? Maybe you've been asking the wrong question all along. Maybe it was never about what job you could get, what promotion you could chase, or what box you could check off next. Maybe it's about something far more sacred. Because the truth is, you weren't created just to survive, to get through the week, to count down until Friday, to numb yourself with a paycheck. You were created with divine fire in your bones. You were built for impact. And yet, so many people go their entire lives never answering the one question that changes everything. What was I born to build? Not for applause, not for security, but because God placed it inside me for a reason. If you've been living on autopilot, feeling like you've lost direction, like you've traded your dreams for comfort and you're calling for routine, this isn't a coincidence. This is your wake-up call. Because something inside you already knows the way you've been living is not the life you were meant for. And if you'll lean in for the next few minutes, you're about to see work and purpose through a lens that will change everything. They told you to get a job. They told you to chase titles, stack your resume, climb a ladder someone else built, and hope you don't fall off. They told you that if you work hard enough, long enough, you'll eventually feel successful. But here you are, years in, and something feels missing. You've got the job, maybe even the corner office, but inside it's quiet, numb, like you've traded the fire in your soul for fluorescent lights and polite applause. And no one talks about this, do they? No one says out loud that the system we were handed, the one that tells you to pick a career at 18 and tie your worth to your job title, is broken. So let me ask you something. What if your job isn't your calling? What if the ladder you've been climbing doesn't lead to your purpose, but to someone else's profits? What if work isn't about what you do to survive, but what you do to serve? There's a man named Jake, grew up in Queens, raised by a single mum who worked double shifts cleaning offices. She'd never sit in. Jake was told to play it safe. So he went to college, got a finance degree, landed a job downtown. The money came, the title came, but something kept gnawing at him. Sundays felt like funerals. He'd stare at his ceiling on Monday mornings, wondering if this was all there was. One night, after a long client dinner, he walked past a tiny music school in Brooklyn. Inside, a kid was playing piano. Nothing fancy, but it stopped him cold. That sound, it hit something raw, something buried. Jake had played piano as a kid until life told him it wasn't practical. That night he didn't go home. He sat on a bench outside of that school and cried, not because he was weak, but because for the first time in years he remembered what it felt like to feel alive. Now here's where most people miss the point. They think following your purpose means quitting your job and chasing a dream. No, it means redefining what work is. It means asking what ignites me, what serves others. What would I do if I wasn't afraid of looking foolish? Jake didn't leave finance right away, but he started teaching piano to kids on Saturdays. One class turned into three turned into 10, and within a year he opened his own program for underprivileged youth, blending financial literacy with music. That's work, that's calling, that's what they never taught you in school. Work isn't a role, it's a rhythm. It's the way your soul shows up in the world. And if you ignore that rhythm long enough, you don't just lose passion, you lose yourself. So here's the warning. If your job is draining you and your soul is whispering for more, listen, because silence doesn't mean peace. Sometimes silence means you're dying slowly. And here's the turning point. The next part will reveal how to rebuild everything from the inside out. Keep listening, because what comes next changes everything. There's a kind of silence most people never talk about, the silence that shows up in your life when everything looks fine from the outside, but inside you feel like a ghost in your own story. You go to work, you smile when you're supposed to, you answer the emails, you sit through the meetings, and you check off the boxes. But when the noise dies down, when you're alone, when you're staring at your ceiling in the dark, there's a question that won't leave you alone. Is this it? Is this all I was made for? That quiet question is not weakness. It's the beginning of truth. It's the crack in the shell of a life you've outgrown. And yet most people ignore it. They drown it in routine, in scrolling, in pretending. But I want you to meet someone. Her name is Rachel, 42 years old, works in HR, has a good salary, a stable routine, benefits the works. Everyone around her says she's made it, but Rachel hasn't felt alive in years. She remembers a time when she wanted to work with troubled youth to help them rebuild their confidence, to be the mentor she never had, but somewhere between paying bills and keeping the peace, that version of her got buried. She didn't even notice the day her dreams went silent. But something happened a few months ago. She saw a young woman, 15, broken, angry, being escorted out of a coffee shop by security. Something about the girl's face stopped Rachel in her tracks. It reminded her of herself, at that age, lost, guarded, ignored, and it hit her like a freight train. I was supposed to be helping girls like her. That was her moment. The divide. The emotional collision between the life she built and the one she was called to live. And that collision, it doesn't destroy you, it reveals you. Most people spend their lives chasing the idea of success while running from the truth of who they are. But at some point the cost of pretending gets too high. And that's when the shift begins. You can feel it in your chest. You start asking different questions. Not what's my next promotion, but what legacy am I leaving? Not how do I keep this job, but who am I becoming while I do this job? There's a deep hunger that awakens when you realize you traded your calling for comfort. That's the emotional divide. And if you've been feeling restless, disconnected, maybe even a little depressed, it's not always a crisis. Sometimes it's a calling trying to cut through the noise. But here's the warning, and I need you to hear this clearly. If you ignore that divide long enough, it starts to close off something sacred inside you. Not all at once, slowly, quietly. Your creativity dims, your hope flattens, your days blend together. You forget what it feels like to be fully alive. That's not just boredom, that's your soul waving a red flag. The great danger isn't failure, it's settling into a version of yourself that's smaller than who you were created to be. The longer you stay in a role that shrinks you, the harder it is to remember your original blueprint. And if you're feeling that now, you're not broken, you're waking up. Because here's what's coming next, and it matters. You're about to learn how to turn that emotional unrest into clarity. You're about to uncover what your life was actually meant to do. And when you do, you won't go back. So if the divide is opening inside, you don't run from it. Step into it. That's where the real work begins. That's where the real you begins. They told you to choose a career path, not a calling to follow the system, not the signal inside you. And so you did what most people do. You picked something safe, something you were good at, something that made sense on paper, but not necessarily in your spirit. And now, years later, there's this quiet question that keeps rising, not with volume, but with weight. Is this all there is? You've got a role, maybe even a title, but the fulfillment feels like a ghost, always just out of reach. And here's the truth. No one taught you in school. Your calling is not the same as your career. They can overlap, sure, but don't confuse the two, or you'll spend your whole life polishing a resume while neglecting your purpose. Your calling is not what you do to make a living, it's what you were born to give while you're alive. Let me tell you about Marcus, a man who built a name in real estate by 33 office buildings in Manhattan, with his name etched in gold by 40 and a nervous breakdown at 42, because no one ever stopped to ask him if any of it made him feel alive. He just kept climbing until his body forced him to stop, and it was in that silence away from meetings, money and momentum that he heard it for the first time, the voice he'd drowned out for decades. The whisper that reminded him of his 7th grade science teacher who used to let him stay after class just to ask questions, the same teacher who saw something in him when no one else did. Marcus didn't sell everything overnight, but he started something small, a non-profit that mentors at-risk teens, helps them build confidence through STEM programs, and the first time a kid called him Mr. M, with that same look of hope he once had in his own eyes, he broke down, not from sadness but from recognition, that feeling of this is why I'm still here. You see, your calling is not always convenient, it rarely pays up front, and it doesn't always make sense to the people around you, but it makes sense to your soul, and that's the part we've been trained to ignore. The danger is not in losing your job, it's in losing the ability to hear yourself when your life gets too loud. And here's the warning, if you don't answer the calling, someone else will define your worth for you. They'll tell you what success should look like, how far you should go, what you should want, and you'll end up chasing their version of purpose while yours withers in silence. Ask yourself this: what's the thing you've always felt pulled toward, the thing that stirs your spirit? When no one's watching the thing, you still do, even if you weren't paid, even if no one gave you credit. That's not just a hobby, that's a hint. That's the divine fingerprint on your heart. And if you don't honor it, if you keep pretending you don't feel it, life will keep sending you moments to wake you up through breakdowns, burnouts, or boredom so deep it feels like grief. But here's the hope. Once you see your calling for what it is, you can never unsee it. The choice is yours now. Ignore it and return to sleepwalking through a life you never chose, or lean in and discover the real reason you were placed on this earth. Because what comes next isn't about success. It's about becoming, and you are closer than you think. So now you've felt the divide, you've heard the whisper, and maybe for the first time in a long time, you're starting to remember there's something more. You just don't know how to reach it. And this is where most people get stuck. Not because they're lazy, not because they're unmotivated, but because no one ever taught them how to bridge the gap between surviving and aligning, between showing up and showing up on purpose. And if you're listening right now thinking, but I don't know where to start, good, because that means you're honest enough to change. And that's where everything begins, with brutal, beautiful honesty. Let's talk about Laura, a 36-year-old single mom from Indiana, 3 kids, 2 part-time jobs, and a soul that still burns, despite the exhaustion in her bones every night. After her shift at the diner, she'd sit in her car and just breathe, engine off, lights dimmed, staring at the old notebook she kept under the passenger seat. Pages full of ideas, stories, children's books, lesson plans, dreams she never said out loud because life told her they weren't realistic. But one night, something shifted. She heard her youngest say, "Mum, do you ever laugh anymore?" And it hit her, not like a feather, like a fist to the chest, because somewhere along the way she had stopped being a creator and started being a caretaker only, and the cost was her joy. That night, she didn't make a vision board. She didn't quit her job. She didn't start a business. She made a decision, one that would sound small to most, but felt massive to her. She opened the notebook, picked one idea, and gave herself 1 hour a week to write it. That's it, 1 hour. But in that hour, she came alive again. And within months, that hour became 2, then 3. And eventually that notebook turned into a children's book series, now being used in local classrooms across her state. And here's what that proves. You don't need permission, a platform, or a perfect plan to align your life with your purpose. What you need is clarity, commitment, and a compass. And I'm going to give you all 3 right now. First, clarity. Ask yourself this question and write it down. What are the 3 things I do that make me forget to check my phone? Whatever those things are, they hold the clues to your alignment, because presence is proof of passion. Second, commitment. Choose one of those things and give it time. And don't tell me you don't have time. You have time to scroll. You have time to overthink. What you lack isn't time. It's clarity on what matters enough to prioritize, block out 1 hour a week. The same way you'd show up for a doctor's appointment or a shift at work, because your purpose deserves at least that much respect. And third, the compass. This one's harder, but necessary. Pay attention to where your energy expands and where it drains. Alignment doesn't always feel easy, but it always feels right. When you're aligned, you may be tired, but you're not empty. You may work hard, but you're not bitter, because your effort feels like investment, not sacrifice. Now, let me be real with you. This isn't some magical shortcut. This is a daily practice. And some days you'll feel like nothing's changing. But here's the dangerous truth. Growth is silent before it becomes visible. And if you judge your progress only by what you can see, you'll quit right before the roots break through. And that's what happens to most people. They give up during the invisible season, the season where the work looks unrewarded and the dream looks ridiculous. But if you stay consistent, if you keep showing up when there's no applause, if you keep pouring into your purpose when no one notices, the breakthrough becomes inevitable, not because of luck, but because of alignment. And if you still think, but I'm not qualified, let me tell you, God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called, and you wouldn't feel the pull if you weren't already chosen to carry it. Alignment is not about leaving everything behind. It's about living everything with intention. And your job right now is not to map out your entire future. It's to take one aligned step today. And if you do that again tomorrow and the next day, what looks like a small act will become a radical transformation. Not because everything changed overnight, but because you did. So here's what's coming next, and I need you to be ready, because we're not done, not even close. What comes next is the shift from alignment into activation, from knowing to building. And if you've stayed with me this far, then you're not someone who's just curious, you're someone who's being called. And what you do after this moment will define whether that calling becomes your future or just another memory you never answered. So take the notebook out, take the hour back, take the step forward. This is how alignment begins, quietly, boldly, one act at a time. We often think transformation begins with something big, a leap of faith, a career change, a lightning bolt of clarity, but more often it begins in the unnoticed corners of our lives, in the smallest routines we overlook. And if you have ever whispered to yourself, there has to be more than this, then let me tell you the truth. There is, and it's not waiting at the end of a dramatic moment. It's hiding inside your daily work right now, waiting to be seen differently. Let me tell you about Chris, an Uber driver in Newark, who used to think his job was just a placeholder, a way to survive until something better came along. He would drive 8 to 10 hours a day, head down, just trying to make enough to cover rent and maybe give his kids a better school district one day. But every night he went home exhausted, not from the work itself, but from the feeling that it didn't matter, that he was invisible, replaceable, small. One morning he picked up a passenger, a woman in tears, clearly shaken, clearly struggling, and instead of playing the usual playlist and staying silent, he asked her if she was okay. Not out of obligation, but out of presence, out of humanity. And in a 20-minute ride, she told him she had just walked out of a toxic job, had no plan, no support, and no one who believed in her. And Chris, this man who once believed he had no impact, told her the story of how he lost everything in 2009, rebuilt his life from a borrowed car and found peace, not through success, but through service. She got out of the car with a different energy, not fixed, not healed, but seen. And Chris sat there in the front seat, motionless, realizing for the first time that maybe his car was more than just a vehicle, it was a vessel. You see, we've been trained to look for purpose in the spotlight, in the loud places, in the recognition. But real purpose is often hidden in repetition, in the moments no one claps for, in the invisible spaces we rush through because we assume nothing sacred lives there. But what if the divine isn't in the destination, but in how you deliver the ordinary? What if folding clothes with care is just as holy as building a brand? What if the way you write emails, wash dishes, or greet strangers at the door becomes the way you preach without ever using words? This is where transformation begins, not by changing what you do, but by changing how you do it. So ask yourself, what is one routine you've labelled as meaningless? Is it your morning commute, your Monday meetings, your nightly chores? What if you turned one of them into a ritual, a presence, a purpose, of excellence? What if instead of dreading that meeting, you used it as a moment to encourage someone who's struggling silently? What if instead of rushing through the dishes, you turned on music, lit a candle, and turned it into a sacred moment to reset your spirit? The emotional peak of this idea isn't that your life has to radically change, it's that your lens does. And here's the warning, and you need to hear it straight. If you keep waiting for purpose to find you in some perfect future scenario, you will miss the miracle buried in today's repetition. If you ignore the sacred inside, the small, your soul will begin to shrink under the weight of boredom, bitterness and burnout. It will feel like life is robbing you of joy, when in fact it was trying to deliver it in the places you never bothered to look. Purpose is not about a platform, it's about presence. Fulfillment is not about arrival, it's about attention. And when you start doing ordinary tasks with extraordinary love, everything changes. You stop measuring your worth by your title and start measuring it by your intention. You stop waiting to be validated and start showing up like your life already matters, because it does. You start transforming not just what you do, but who you become while you do it. So from this moment forward, don't just go to work. Bring your spirit to it. Don't just finish tasks, infuse them with presence. Don't just survive the day, serve through it. And remember Chris, because he didn't need a stage, a CEO, badge, or millions of followers to become a leader. He just needed to show up fully for one person in the middle of his daily grind. That's how transformation begins. That's how purpose is revealed. Not someday, but now, in the small, in the seen and unseen. And if you truly understood the power of what you're holding in your daily life, you'd never call your work ordinary again. There comes a moment in every journey when the path narrows, when the lights dim, and you're left standing at the edge of something new, with one unshakable question clawing at your mind. What if I fail? What if I'm not enough? What if I step forward and it all falls apart? And maybe that's where you are right now, not stuck because you don't have potential, not paralyzed because you lack vision, but frozen because fear has wrapped itself around your purpose and whispered, you're not ready. But what if the fear you're feeling isn't a stop sign, it's a signal? What if it's not there to warn you of danger, but to reveal where your next level of growth lives? Let me tell you about Kevin, a former firefighter from Pittsburgh who spent 15 years running into burning buildings, but was terrified to walk into a classroom and speak to teenagers. After he retired, he felt a deep pull to start a mentorship program for young men growing up without fathers, not because it was convenient, not because he was trained, but because he remembered what it felt like to be 15, angry, alone, misunderstood. He had survived a lot, but the idea of stepping into that calling made his hands shake. His voice crack, his mind race with doubt. What if I mess this up? What if I say the wrong thing? What if they don't listen? And then something happened that shifted everything. He got a call from a friend, a high school principal, asking if he could come speak to a group of boys who had just been suspended for fighting. Not a formal speech, not a big crowd, just a few chairs and a circle. Kevin said yes, but inside he was spiraling. He didn't sleep the night before, didn't eat the morning of, but when he walked into that room and locked eyes with a kid named Malik, 12 years old, hoodie up, head down, he saw himself. And without reading a script or quoting a statistic, Kevin sat down and said, I know what it feels like to be angry all the time. And that's when the room changed, because when fear was screaming at him to run, he chose to speak from his scars, not his script. And that's the power most people never tap into. Your fear doesn't mean you're not ready. It means you're on the edge of something sacred. So here's the truth that no motivational quote on your Instagram feed is going to tell you. Fear is baked into the process of becoming doubt, is part of the doorway. And every person who ever did something meaningful heard the voice that said you're not good enough and did it anyway. Do you think purpose waits for you to feel confident? Do you think destiny shows up when you finally feel qualified? No, it shows up when you're still shaking, still stuttering, still unsure, but willing. There's a dangerous belief floating around right now that says you have to wait until you're fully healed, to help wait until you're perfect, to step forward. But what if that's a lie designed to keep you stuck? What if the very act of stepping into your calling is what begins your healing? What if the fear isn't there to break you, but to burn off everything in you that was never meant to go where you're going? Here's the warning. If you keep waiting for fear to disappear, you'll wait forever. Because fear doesn't leave when you think your way around it. It leaves when you move through it. You silence fear, not with logic, but with movement. Doubt doesn't disappear because you journal it away. It disappears when your feet touch the fire and you realize you're still standing. That's what Kevin learned in that classroom. That's what you'll learn the moment you stop negotiating with fear and start walking with faith. And no, this isn't about reckless leaps. It's about faithful steps. It's about deciding that the pain and regret will hurt more than the discomfort of risk. It's about understanding that growth isn't supposed to feel safe. It's supposed to stretch you. So here's the question I need you to ask yourself right now. What is the one move I've been putting off because of fear? Not 10 moves. 1. The phone call, the application, the conversation, the first draft. What would shift if you did it today? Not perfectly, not confidently, but obediently, because fear fades when obedience leads. And the most powerful people you'll ever meet aren't the ones who never felt fear. They're the ones who trained themselves to move through it. Your fear is loud right now because your breakthrough is close. The resistance you feel is a sign that you're near the edge of something holy. And if you'll take just one step today, you'll learn the truth. Kevin learned in that classroom that the strength was never supposed to come before the action. It comes because of the action. This is your moment. Step forward anyway. You're ready, even if you don't feel like it yet. There's a lie that's been passed down, like gospel, a lie dressed in logic, reinforced by repetition, and buried so deep in your thinking that you might not even know it's there. It sounds like this. If you follow your purpose, you'll have to struggle. If you choose passion over paycheck, you'll go broke. If you align with your calling, you'll have to sacrifice your stability. But what if that belief, that fear-soaked blueprint, is the very thing blocking the abundance meant for you? What if your lack isn't from laziness or bad luck, but from misalignment? What if the moment you start showing up as the version of you who's fully alive, fully invested, and fully surrendered to what you're here to do, everything begins to shift? Let me tell you about Vanessa, a 39-year-old graphic designer from Detroit who spent over a decade making decent money, doing work that dulled her spirit on paper. She had security. She had clients, deadlines, contracts, but every morning she felt herself drifting further from joy, and one night, after yet another logo revision for a brand she didn't care about, she whispered a prayer into the ceiling, not loud, not desperate, just real. God, I know there's more for me than this. Show me how to live it. And the next morning she didn't get a sign or a contract or a miracle. She got a nudge, a name that popped into her mind. Ava, her best friend's daughter, who had been diagnosed with leukemia and spent most of her days in hospitals surrounded by cold white walls and silent machines, and it hit Vanessa like thunder. What if she could use her gift not just to design for companies but to create something for healing? That same week, she started sketching illustrations, bright, bold, joy-soaked art, just for Ava, not for profit, not for attention, just to bring light into that sterile room. And what began as a single act of love turned into something that would change her life, because one of the nurses posted a photo of Ava holding Vanessa's custom print, and that post caught fire. Soon other parents were reaching out asking for artwork, asking if she could make something for their children too. And in less than 6 months, Vanessa launched a full creative project called Colour the Fight, an online store that donates a portion of proceeds to pediatric cancer families. She's now earning more than she ever made working for big agencies, and she's finally at peace, not because she chased money, but because she followed meaning, and the money followed her alignment. This is the part we need to understand, not just in theory but in our bones. Abundance is not a reward for hustle, it's the consequence of alignment. And when you're aligned with your calling, you don't have to force opportunity, you attract it. When you're doing the work you were designed to do, doors open that hustle alone can't unlock, because energy doesn't lie and purpose doesn't beg. And I know someone listening right now is still carrying the weight of generational scarcity, raised on phrases like "we can't afford that," or "money doesn't grow on trees," or "do something safe." But let me ask you, what if your safety is actually suffocating your future? What if the very thing you've been afraid to pursue is the exact assignment that would free your family from the fear they've normalized for decades? And here's the emotional peak, the part that should shake you into stillness. Abundance is not just financial, it's spiritual, it's emotional. It's the feeling of being at peace in your bones. At the end of the day, it's waking up with energy, not because you slept in, but because you're living, right? It's having your needs met, not because you climbed the corporate ladder, but because you built something that matched your heart. Now, don't misunderstand me. This isn't about quitting your job tomorrow and hoping a miracle drops from the sky. It's about doing the work to realign, to bring your daily actions closer to your divine assignment, to stop pouring your energy into work that doesn't serve your soul, and then wondering why you feel empty. You were not designed to live in lack. You were not created to chase survival. You were built to steward overflow, not just for yourself, but for others. And when you walk in your calling, provision becomes a byproduct of obedience. But here's the warning, and I say this with love. If you keep choosing what's safe over what's sacred, you'll survive, but you'll never thrive. You'll have just enough to get by, but never enough to give back. And the tragedy isn't just what you miss out on. It's what the world misses when you stay small. So I need you to hear this clearly. Your gift is not a burden. Your desire for more is not greed. Your dream is not delusion, it's direction, it's divine guidance, disguised as longing. And when you stop silencing it, when you stop shrinking it, when you start honouring it, you'll find that the resources were always there, waiting for you to show up as a version of yourself who was ready to receive. The abundance isn't coming one day. It's already circling you, waiting for alignment, waiting for action, waiting for your yes. And once you give it, your life will never look the same. There's a truth most people never discover because they're too busy looking for meaning in the mountaintop moments and missing it in the mundane. The truth that work, when done with the right heart, is worship, not performance, not punishment, but praise in motion. And until you see it that way, you'll keep dragging yourself through your days, wondering why you feel disconnected, wondering why something still feels hollow, even when the bills are paid and the goals are reached. And maybe that's where you are now, showing up, doing your best, but wondering if any of it matters beyond the paycheck, beyond the praise, beyond the productivity. Let me take you into the life of Thomas, a 53-year-old janitor at a public high school in Kansas City, a man whose job, by the world's standards, was simple: empty the trash, clean the halls, lock up at night. But the way Thomas moved through that building wasn't like a man just doing a job. It was like someone honouring a sacred space. Every day he arrived an hour early, swept with care, wiped every desk, greeted every student with a look that said, "I see you." And when a teacher once asked him, "Why do you treat this like it's more than maintenance?" he smiled and said, "Because it is. I may not preach from a pulpit, but this is my ministry. I'm making space for young minds to grow, and that matters." And what most people never knew is that Thomas lost his son 5 years earlier to violence just blocks from that school, and instead of folding under grief, he chose to turn his pain into purpose. To show up every day and make sure someone else's child had a clean, safe space to learn, and to serve quietly and faithfully, not for recognition, but out of love, out of reverence. This is what we miss when we only value big stages and overlook the sacred power in quiet service, because the real worship isn't always loud. It's not always on Sunday. Sometimes it shows up on a Tuesday at 6 a.m. with a mop in hand and a heart full of prayer. Sometimes it's in the way you answer emails with grace, or cook dinner for your family, even when you're tired, or finish a job no one thanks you for, because you know deep down you're not doing it for them, you're doing it for him. Colossians 3:23 says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters." And that's not just a verse, it's a blueprint. It's a reminder that the way you show up for your work is a reflection of your heart. And when you shift from doing it for approval to doing it as an offering, everything changes. So let me ask you, what would shift in your spirit if you saw every task as a form of worship? What if sending that invoice, making that call, scrubbing that floor, leading that meeting, what if it was all part of your spiritual practice? What if success wasn't measured by the applause of man, but by the integrity of your effort? Here's the emotional peak and the warning that comes with it. When you forget that your work is sacred, you start to shrink your identity down to your title, your performance, your numbers, and that's dangerous, because the world will always give you a label. But it's your worship that gives you meaning. And if you let the world define your worth by outcomes, you'll forget how to bring your whole self to the process. Don't let the pace of life steal the presence you're meant to carry. Don't let comparison rob you of the reverence you're meant to walk in. And don't let discouragement convince you that what you do doesn't matter just because it's quiet. God doesn't measure impact by volume. He measures it by faithfulness. And you don't have to be in a church to be in alignment. You don't have to sing to be worshipping. Sometimes worship looks like excellence, like patience, like showing up when no one claps. Sometimes it's the way you build with integrity, or how you treat people when no one's watching. Sometimes it's the way you serve others when you yourself are still healing. Your life is the altar. Your work is the offering. And the more you align your heart with that truth, the more fulfilled you'll feel in every season. Because fulfillment doesn't come from how big your task is. It comes from how deep your why is. So whether you're leading a team, or sweeping a floor, teaching a class, or driving a delivery van, I need you to remember this. What you do is important, but how you do it is what turns it into worship. And if you've been moving through your life, numb, routine, disconnected, maybe it's not the work that's the problem. Maybe it's the perspective. So here's the shift, and it's simple but powerful. Stop doing your work for validation. Start doing it for glory. Not your glory, but his. Because when your hands move with that kind of intention, when your work becomes your worship, you will never feel insignificant again, and everything you touch will start to carry the mark of something eternal. That is the power of worship in motion. That is the truth waiting to transform how you work, how you live, how you love. And the moment you embrace it, you won't just go to work. You'll walk into it with purpose, with presence, and with a fire no paycheck could ever provide. You've waited long enough, doubted long enough, played it safe long enough. You've spent years showing up for jobs that didn't speak to your soul, performing for titles that didn't reflect your truth, going through motions that looked like success on the outside but felt like silence on the inside, but something inside you has been rising, something raw, something real, something ready, and it's been whispering the same thing over and over again. It's time, not tomorrow, not when you feel more prepared, not when the fear disappears, but right now, because the person you were created to be is already inside you, buried under fear, buried under excuses, buried under other people's expectations, but alive and waiting to be unleashed. This isn't just about changing how you work. This is about changing how you live, how you love, how you show up for your own life. Because once you shift from surviving to serving, from performance to purpose, From chasing to aligning, everything begins to transform. And no, it won't be easy, but it will be real. And real is what you've been craving, not the polished version of life, not the filtered success, but the kind of fulfillment that wakes you up in the morning with conviction, the kind that makes your heart beat louder than your doubts. So hear me clearly. This is your line in the sand, your moment of decision, your invitation to rise. And I don't care where you've been or how many times you've doubted. You are not behind. You are not too late. You are not unqualified. You are being called. And if this message shook something loose inside you, if it stirred something you haven't felt in years, then I need you to move, not just in your mind, but in your life. Drop a comment right now that says, I will work with purpose, not just as a statement, but as a stake in the ground, a declaration that you are done settling, done shrinking, done performing for approval you no longer need. And while you're here, hit subscribe, not for hype, not for more noise, but because this space is different. This is for those ready to rebuild their lives from the inside out. For those who understand that purpose isn't just something you find, it's something you activate, something you serve, something you live. And the moment you commit to that kind of life is the moment everything changes. Not because the world suddenly opens its arms, but because you stop waiting for permission and start walking in power. So let the world chase trends and titles while you build a life of depth, of service, of truth, because that's what you were born for. And deep down, you've always known it. Your time is now, not someday, not next season. Now the shift begins today. And when you look back years from now at the moment it all changed, let this be it. The moment you stopped watching and started becoming